Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest Agile Education Program webinar. I'm Tom Bullock, Scrum Inc's Chief Storyteller. And our goal with this series is to help you deliver more value faster. This webinar is brought to you in partnership with our authorized Agile education providers. You can find trusted Agile education training no matter where you are in the world. From Beijing to Argentina, Japan to the United States, you can count on our AAEPs to deliver high-quality training and help you bring true agility to your organization. Find a trusted, reliable Scrum and Agile training partner at agileeducation.org/partners. And to answer a common question, yes, we will be posting an on-demand recording of this webinar at agileeducation.org. Today, our featured speaker is none other than Avi Schneier. Avi is a Principal Agile Transformation Consultant at Scrum Inc. He is also an AEP Fellow, a well-established thought leader, and contributor to the ScrumAtScale guide. Avi firmly believes you can build your organization like you build your products. Actually, Avi believes you should if you really are to deliver value faster and with higher quality. Now, that's not always easy, unless you know how. This is why Avi is here today, to show us how a component-driven organization can grow at a sustainable pace, and why the ScrumAtScale framework is the only Agile framework that allows for the flexibility, focus, and autonomy needed to stay competitive. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Avi. Take it away.
Thanks, Tom, and it's great to see you. So we're going to be talking about how to build your organization like you build your products. Which means before we can talk about building the organization, we have to all come to the same understanding of how we build products with Scrum. Now, I know a lot of you out there already know this in Scrum and Agile land, but let's make sure we're all on the same page. In Scrum, at the very beginning, what we normally see happen is that some customer gets together with a stakeholder because they have some great idea for a new product. We want this conversation to happen in the presence of a product owner so that the idea ends up with clarity on some team's backlog. That product owner is going to work with their team and talk about everything in there. They're going to go through a process called backlog refinement to kind of flesh out all the ideas that they have to go through to make this reality for their customer. They're going to come up with some sprint goal. They're going to put the backlog through a sprint, and out comes some increment of value. Now, what I really want to hone in on here is not the process of Scrum, because you're all familiar with that. What I want to hone in here on is that underneath this process of Scrum are Scrum and Agile principles behind building our products. So let's take a look at them. On the left, we have our ideas from Scrum, and on the right, our ideas from Agile. Now, when you look at these, they kind of all fall under three really important categories. Take a look here. A lot of these ideas are scientific, whether you're talking about empiricism or you're talking about responding to change over following a plan. Many of them are also born from Lean because that's the root of Scrum and Agile. Things like doing things just enough, just in time, or an MVP, simplicity. These are all Lean principles. And the last grouping is the fact that it's all realistic. Now, when you take a look at these three ideas, scientific, Lean, and realistic, you have to ask yourself, if this is how we build our products, why would we want to build our organization in a different way? It doesn't make a lot of sense. I also want to put one other thing front and center. Scrum, Lean, and Agile, they're all about being human-centric, people first. Whether you're talking about the Scrum values or the values and principles from the Agile Manifesto, people play just as much as an important role as the product does. So again, you have to ask yourself, if we put people first in thinking about how we do this, why would we do that differently in an organization? The answer is we wouldn't. Let's take a look at how ScrumAtScale addresses this situation. Let's talk about ScrumAtScale and architecture in particular. A lot of you have taken our classes and you may have seen a slide, something like this, when we talk about Moore's Law. I'm not here to talk about Moore's Law. what I want to show you is that this idea of Moore's law is something that Dr. Sutherland applied in a paper, which he had submitted way back in 1999. And it's the title of this paper that really brings us to the logic underlying ScrumAtScale, which is that it's a business object component architecture. For those of you that know the history of Scrum, Dr. Sutherland first presented with his partner at the time, Ken Schwaber, about Scrum at something called the Uppsala Conference, which is all about object-oriented programming languages. Dr. Sutherland posited, well, if we can build our products as object-oriented pieces that we put together into a system, why couldn't we do that with a business? And this kind of gave birth to the idea of Agile Architecture, which is all about components and known stable interfaces. Now, a good example of this might be something that's sitting in your father's basement somewhere, an old stereo rack system. In this stereo rack system, these were all different components, right? You had a record player, a tape deck, an amplifier, a subwoofer, all these different pieces. But they didn't have to be made by the same company. See, as long as they used the same interfaces, these like old RGB cables and audio cables, and today we have USB cables. As long as they have these stable interfaces, then you could hot swap them out, so to speak. So if you had this amplifier by Sony and it broke, you could unplug it and take one by a different company, Panasonic or something, and plug it right in with those same cables, and it would still work. You wouldn't have to throw out all the pieces in order to keep the system functioning. And that's the same idea we have in ScrumAtScale. You should be able to analyze any component of your organization, fix it, change it, do whatever you want, modify it, as long as the interface by which it connects to the other parts of your system don't change. Now, when you create an organization this way, this allows you to adapt and evolve the organization's own design and structure. It allows the structure to emerge organically in response to inspect and adapt cycles based on changing needs of the market, changing needs of a single product, or changing needs of the human beings involved. For example, right now, we have huge flux of what's going on in the marketplace in terms of employees when it comes to hybrid work. First, we were all in the office. Some people were remote. Then all of a sudden, everybody was remote. Now, some people are going back to the office. And so we need to apply this notion of inspect and adapt in order to modify how we're doing what we're doing to make a better working environment for all involved so we can continually deliver the highest value to our customers. Now, some of you may not be familiar with the ScrumAtScale framework. And we like to say that this framework is made of these components that you see here. But I don't want you to think of these components like as a noun, like this is a solid object. I want you to think of it instead as a series of questions that have to be answered in order for these cycles to operate continuously and effectively and efficiently. Take, for example, strategic vision. So some people think the strategic vision is a statement written on a wall somewhere in your office that you walk past that you're not really sure if we're actually in pursuit of that. That's not the strategic vision. Strategic vision is that statement, but it's also, how did we come up with it? How do we test it? How do we communicate it? And if you notice, strategic vision feeds into backlog prioritization. So there's an interface there. So part of strategic vision is also saying, hey, how do we make sure that our backlog prioritization reflects our strategic vision? What are the policies and procedures or metrics that we're going to follow to ensure that happens? Now, in this way, I want to bring you to a different place than you may have ever gone when it comes to understanding ScrumAtScale. There are two major ways to look at it. There's almost like a yin and yang attribute. And those attributes are the components of the framework itself, and the other one is the organizational design. These are the two parts to getting Scrum at Scale or scaling any type of agile way of working correct. There's the interfaces between the parts of your system, how they talk together, how they work together, what's all the flux involved, and of course, the design that supports that. And I don't want you to think that it's one supporting only the other. That's why I chose this diagram as a way to represent that. They both support one another, and you have to modify them in response to one another and the changes that are occurring in your organization in real time. Now, some people have asked me, when people try to adopt Scrum or begin scaling, where are the biggest mistakes? When it comes to Scrum, the biggest mistake is that when people try to switch to whatever it is they're doing to Scrum, or even if they're doing Scrum and they try to become more orthodox in their method of behavior, they try to map it. They say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what Scrum is. And they go like this. But what they forget is that it doesn't always map one-to-one. And that causes a lot of friction and disharmony, and it tends to break the Scrum on the team. You have to realize that if you want to change from not Scrum to Scrum or bad Scrum to true Scrum, there's going to be stuff that doesn't overlay properly, and you have to bring that into alignment. The same thing happens when you're trying to design your organization. The biggest mistake I encounter when companies are switching from not Scrum and not Scrum at Scale, or a poor Scrum at Scale implementation to a true Scrum at Scale implementation, is they try to take their organizational hierarchy and map Scrum at Scale onto it. Same situation. It doesn't map one-to-one. This is not about your organizational hierarchy being preserved. This is about what is the best way to deliver value to our customers. Organizations, managers, owners of a company, they have to be willing to let go. They have to be willing to let go and kind of almost start from the bottom up. So what is that bottom up that you have to start from? That's a great question. And the answer is, you need to map your value stream. Now, some of you may know about Valuestream Mapping. I don't know how literate everybody is on the call here. So let me just explain it a little bit. One of the things people confuse are value stream maps and process maps. Your value stream map is essentially the highest level or bird's eye view of what it is to take, what it is it takes to go from some type of request received for value all the way to value delivered. This is this most zoomed out view. Value stream maps help us identify upstream and downstream processes that create value for our customers. You can think of this as, ideation to implementation, request to delivery, first contact to cash, whatever way you need to think about it. This zoomed out view is your value stream. Now, a process map is essentially a piece of a value stream map. So the idea here is that you take a look inside of a single value stream process, one step, and then you say, okay, what are the processes inside of this? Process maps help us define the step-by-step, activities of a single part of the value stream. The emphasis here is on who does what, decision points and pain points by those closest to the work. If you start from this perspective, building your organization this way, you're going to be leagues ahead of everybody else, your competitors that are saying, well, I don't care how we deliver anything. I've got to make sure that I preserve the 10 people that work under me. I've got to make sure that I don't give anybody else away from my department, from my group, just because other people need their skill set. That's a sure way of sinking your organization. That's the type of territorialism that we notice creates incredible dysfunction and destroys companies in the long run. Now, after you do process mapping, this is when you can develop your SOPs, your standard operating procedures by which everything is supposed to happen, okay? So these are the 3 levels or layers that we want to take a look at when we're designing an organization. But here's the mistake a lot of people make, is they go to the SOP and they say, oh, let's design the organization around these protocols. No. There's an old phrase that people think in generalities, but live in details. So it's really easy to get lost in the sauce, as you might say, when you're so focused, so focused on these standard operating procedures, instead of taking a look at the value stream. Now, once you do this value stream map and analysis, you can begin to design your organization properly. And it doesn't matter essentially what kind of product you make. You can do this when it comes to hardware design. You can do this on a factory floor. And you can see here, and this shows an example of a lean factory, how they make these drawings, right, of showing how the object needs to essentially be processed as it goes through the system. And then, of course, you go and you design the actual factory this way. You do this with the notion of lean in mind, right? Eliminating waste. Now, some of you are saying, well, I could see how that would work for a factory and a physical product, but can you do that in knowledge work? Absolutely. Many of us have experienced things like an agile open office design, places where people can openly communicate, but still give us enough privacy when we need to run things like Scrum events or doing brainstorming sessions like backlog refinement. So there's a lot of ways that you can design your organization literally physically to help emphasize being lean, eliminating waste, and one of those wastes that people know about is called transport, moving stuff from place to place. That happens in knowledge work too. We end up making too many queues and having the Hollywood situation of hurry up and wait. Well, we're done. Yes, but they're not ready. Or, hey, we're done. And actually, that's not a state that we can accept it in. When you think about this and how you design your organization, you want to consider the value stream. You need to understand that if you want to design your organization properly, you have to figure out what is the flow of value and focus on that. It may pertain to the customer experience, but it also matters return on investment. If you're in a nonprofit world, that might be impact value instead of straight cash. There's a reason why. Organizations do not do things all for the customer's benefit to their own detriment. If not, that's not a business. That's a hobby. So in business, we don't operate that way. We want to make sure when we're thinking about the value stream that we're always considering ways of providing transparency, both of the development process itself, as well as the delivery of value. And that delivery of value includes 2 aspects. The thing that we deliver, physical, digital, complex, whatever it is, service, doesn't matter, and how it's delivered. How does the customer actually get it? You know, once upon a time, many of you out there probably had an account with a company called AOL. They actually still exist. And they used to assault you with, you know, somebody probably remembering, oh, I have so many coffee coasters of the CDs that they used to send. Yeah, that's not how AOL sends the software now. You download it out of the cloud like anything else. That's the deal. So you have to take a look at both the product, the value that it delivers, and how our customers receive that value, how it is actually delivered to them. Also, we have to understand what is our ability to tolerate change. Because when we take a look at value streams honestly and openly and say, this needs to be, you know, we could eliminate this step, or this machine works, but it's not the top in the industry. If we bought, you know, machinery X, we could make more units per hour. We have to really understand what is our ability to tolerate the changes that customers and our own internal customers, consumers and internal customers are asking for. And that's because not everybody tolerates change very well. Some of you may have noticed that if you've ever been part of a transformation and trying to help companies adopt new ways of working. Another thing which I want to target here in terms of a conversation is that once you figure out the layout of the value stream, now you bring your people to it. Now, this is sometimes a little bit, again, very difficult in an organization that's trying to preserve the old hierarchy of the old ways of working. If you were going to build a factory, you don't first think, okay, Fred is sitting over here and Melissa's sitting over there. So and Melissa does her thing after Fred. So let's make sure that it goes this way. No. First thing you do is you say, great, what would be the optimal design, the optimal layout of this value delivery? And then we bring Fred and Melissa and Kennedy and we bring them to the line. We bring them to the value stream. And it doesn't matter if it's physical or if it's virtual or digital. The idea is to bring the people to it. So design the system and bring people to the system. Now, when you're doing this, you want to keep this in mind. What are the roles that we need? First one, I put it here very simple. Leaders are greater than managers. What do I mean by that? Leadership is a quality. Being a leader is different than being a manager. Leadership, it kind of invokes the notion of voluntary following. And we've all experienced this in our work lives. You may work in the best company right now, and so maybe it was someplace else that you experienced this. But there was somebody who was in charge that you were like, I will follow this person. This person says, we're going this way, I go this way. And then there are people that said, hey, we're going this way. And you were like, yeah, I don't think that that's what I want to do, but I get my paycheck here, so I'm going to go that way. Leadership is greater than management. Management is a job that people get hired for and paid for, but that doesn't mean that they understand how to inspire those that work for them. No, that's not how we talk in Scrum and ScrumAtScale. They don't inspire those who they support, who they're in care of. Managers have people that work for them. Leaders have people that they take care of, people in their stead. So always remember this, when you're designing your organization, you need to think about what leaders do I need in this value stream to help inspire everybody to deliver this value as fast as possible. The second part, empowerment. Empowerment only happens when leaders and those who are doing the work in their care are aligned. So it's very important here that when we create our leaders and put our leaders in place, is that they have great communication skills so that they can inspire others, but also help to empower them and say, hey, you can do this. You can take this decision. You can make this decision. This is what leaders do. They have to establish clear boundaries of decision rights. I'm accountable for this. I make this set of decisions. You're accountable for that. You get to make those decisions. And this other person, they're accountable for the other. They make those decisions. If you can figure out your value stream, get the right people in place, the right people in the right seats, as Dr. Sutherland would like to say, and then get this empowerment, this chain of empowerment going, you will have a great start to building your organization. So let's take a look at it now from a Scrum perspective. You start out with a team. But here's the question. In Scrum, we like to say that a team should be an independent path to production. So if that's true, doesn't the whole value stream live inside them, inside that team? That could be the case. But then why do we have questions about scaling? See, if they're an independent path to production, why do you have to scale at all? You could type it in the chat, but you might not be fast enough. Here's the deal. You might have to scale because the item is too complex for one team to deliver. Or maybe you want to get it out faster and having more teams deliver by taking that product and putting it into pieces and having each team deliver a piece, that might be quicker. So complexity and speed are the two major reasons we see companies wanting to add more and more teams. There are other reasons for sure, but those are my two favorites. So now you've realized you want to scale. So maybe you add a second team. Maybe you add even a third team. Now, when you've done this, they need to coordinate. This is the hard part, right? Because if you don't put coordination mechanisms in place, what ends up happening is these teams become very myopic. They tend to work on just their backlog without an understanding that there's a larger backlog that these come from. There's something greater than their piece represents. So we group these teams into a scrum of scrums. That's what this unit of joint teams is called. In order to help them work well, we need a meta scrum that helps to distribute the backlog, helps to prioritize things from a wider perspective. And of course, you need a scale daily scrum, a place for the scrum masters, or again, anyone can attend the scale daily scrum. I'm not sure if everyone knows that, as a way to bring up impediments and share learnings, as a hopeful way to kind of get this to be coordinated really, really well together. Now, this again may not be enough. Is 3 teams enough? I don't know. We're building military grade fighter jets. Well, 3 teams may not work. Some of you probably work in organizations where you have not 10 or 15 people delivering a product, but 10 or 15,000. That happens. So when in those cases, you have to be able to continually scale. Some of these patterns for scaling, they're out there in the ScrumAtScale guide, but one of them that we just showed here was mitosis. When a team gets too big, it can split. This is another reason why we scale as well. Then, of course, again, due to complexity or speed, we may want even more teams. So when we do that, you're going to have to create mirror images of things. Now, I'm using 3 and 3 as an example, but not everything is going to fit nicely into those shapes. When you get to this point, you're going to need just a little bit more, because after all, you might have a problem getting the teams on the left talking to the teams on the right. That's an old expression in English, right? The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So we need a nexus of communication for that. And we have that. We have that in the executive meta scrum and the executive action team. So you can think of the meta scrum on the scrum in the scrum of scrums here as a local meta scrum or a leadership meta scrum, an LMS, and the scale daily scrum can become an LAT or a leadership action team as these things get a little bit bigger. Let me just show one more final slide because I see Tom coming on to ask me some questions here. This needs to sometimes get supersized. So again, you're still going to follow the same patterns, adding on teams as you need organically as a way to get this to grow. And I just want to make one final point here. This is why there's no one size fits all prescription. And it's why a lot of these out of the box scaling frameworks eventually fail. Because every company context, culture, and environment is different. You can't just squeeze everybody into the same thing. I want you to think of ScrumAtScale not as a box with hard sides. Because if you try to jam every different company in that, the sides bust. ScrumAtScale, I want you to think of a wireframe cube. You can put any organization in because some of them bulge out a little bit over here, some bulge out a little bit over there, but they don't break the wireframe. So the way you start is by identifying and mapping your value streams, then populate them with your people. Don't constrain the expansion in a preconceived way. Don't think it has to be 3 and 3 because the pretty pictures show it, right? You have to be open to iterating your organizational design based on your customer and your employee needs, the same way you're open to iterating your product design. The goal is organic growth at a sustainable pace of change that can be better accepted by the humans involved in the process. In the Agile Manifesto, they talk about sustainable development. It's great, but understand something. If the organization can also be considered a product, it's a product of the executive leadership. The organization is a product of the EMS and the EAT. Then we have to understand what's the sustainable pace of change our human beings involved in our value streams can tolerate. As a closing thought, please remember, modifying agile ways of working is about best principles, not best practices. Another big mistake, I go into an organization, first thing they say is, oh, we don't have to learn a lot of stuff here. Just whatever you did in the last place, do that here. No. What works in another company, even if it's in your same domain, what works in another part of your own organization may not transfer over well. It always has to be customized because of the uniqueness of the scenario. That's right, as Elena just put in the Slack, copy and paste doesn't work. It's a matter of fact, plagiarism is something that we completely say you shouldn't do. So don't do that either, okay? And now, Tom, I think I'm done with my spiel. Please, let's open it up for some questions.
And we do have some good ones. First of all, thank you, Avi. I'm going to do this in a little bit of a different order, and we're going to start a few slides back, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because we have a really interesting question. And the goal of these is delivering value faster. That's the purpose of these webinars. So this one I think is particularly relevant when we're looking at, your scaling and then super scaling models that you showed. Yeah. The question is, my biggest fear when doing Scrum at Scale is creating additional bureaucracies in which a non-lean organization tends to impede the Scrum framework. Creating a more central management for Scrum Masters or POs makes an organization less lean. How should we stay lean? And then the questioner also asks, is Nexus a better approach? It would be, more in keeping with the spirit. They ask yes or no. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
So let's go to the second one. They ask about the Nexus framework. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct. So
in my opinion, which some of you out there in Agile land know that means it's the truth. Nexus, LESS, all of these other frameworks are instances of Scrum at Scale. Because again, if you think back to what I said, that Scrum at Scale is really a series of questions for you to answer. LESS, Nexus, SAFe, all these other versions, they all answer it their way. They're providing those answers. And so that's why they're scaling frameworks, is they're providing their answers. The issue is that they may only provide one set of answers and assume that every organization can adopt those answers for themselves. In Scrum at Scale, rather than saying that there's only one set of answers to this particular set of questions, we understand that the set of questions is incredibly variable. And that means so is the set of answers. So it's really about taking a look at, how does your organization work now? What we would call, even in Valuestream Mapping, your current state, versus how do you want it to work, a future state, and then figuring out the plan to get there. That's what this is really about. And that's the same way you start with, okay, the customer wants a car. What kind of car? You have all these images in mind, but that's not really it. Instead, you do demographics work, you do interviews, you figure out as you iterate towards what the final design of the car will really be. You have to do the same thing for your organization. You can't just know everything ahead of time.
Sure.
So go back to your first question now.
Yeah, let's go to the first point, which is that fear of adding additional layers of bureaucracy, which of course it's not just not lean, it's not really agile.
I want everybody to understand that the way I like to approach this, and my approach comes straight out of Dr. Sutherland and what we do here at Scrum Inc, is it's an iterative approach. So we iterate the organization the same way you iterate the problem. Take a look at some of your favorite software out there. The odds are when you first started using the first version, it didn't have a lot of features. And then over time, they kept adding and adding and adding and adding until you're like, wow, this thing is really bloated. Companies like, for example, Adobe right now are looking to remove features because it's actually made the product less user-friendly. if you know anything about the bodybuilding world, right? These guys who exercise to become really huge, they go through these cycles of bulking and cutting, adding a lot of mass and then slimming down. You can do the same thing with your organization. And I want you to know that that's okay. It's okay that when you build, all of a sudden you realize, we thought we were doing the right thing, but now we've got so many layers of leadership, we don't know what to do. Yeah. That means it's time to enter the cutting phase. Now, understand something. When I say cutting, I'm not speaking like somebody from one of the traditional large consulting houses, the big 3 or big 4 here. In a really good Scrum or Lean transformation, you don't have to fire anybody. All you have to do is figure out where they should be working instead. You can have job security, but not role security. Because, in Scrum, for example, Tom, we don't pay people to come to work, read the newspaper, and go to the golf course. We pay people to decide what value should be delivered, deliver the value, facilitate the process. You fit in one of those 3 categories. If not, maybe you really should work somewhere else. Dr. Sutherland's very clear about saying that the job of a really good Scrum Master is to get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. I like to add, they should also tell everybody who's still on the bus to buckle up, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. So we need to think about those things.
So let's step back for a big picture question here. And that question is, why Agile versus, traditional system development lifecycle approach?
Well, I think that's been proven out time and again. In the Standish study, for example, looking at over 50,000 projects, that shows that, for example, decision latency is your biggest, most critical number for whether or not your project's going to succeed or fail. And when you build these organizations in these traditional standard ways with these layers upon layers of bureaucracy, as the person who asked the question is saying, all you're doing is stretching out the decision latency, sorry, Tom, is the amount of time it takes to make a decision. So the more layers of bureaucracy you make, the longer it takes to make the decision, the greater the likelihood of failure. This is the idea that I put up about empowering people to make decisions in the right positions in the organization. Because if you empower them to make those decisions, they get made faster. And that increases the likelihood of success. Some people will say, but what if they make the wrong decision? Well, that's okay. That's why in Scrum, we recommend very short sprint cycles, 1 or maybe 2 weeks at most. At least at Scrum Inc, we recommend that. The guide says 4 weeks or less, but take a little consulting from me here. 1 or 2 weeks is the most you want to go, because that means the most you can have a wrong decision is 1 or 2 weeks. Then you can pivot and change to a different direction.
So let's look at leadership, which is always, an important issue to tackle especially when it comes to scaling or organizational architecture.
Right.
How, in your experience, Avi, how do you get leaders not just to buy in, but actually take part, be active participants?
This is a great question. I mean, often people have heard me say the difference between ScrumAtScale and the other scaling frameworks is this word, participation. I come from Brooklyn. Okay, I come from New York. Buy-in is lip service. It's cheap. Participation is what matters. Do you have skin in the game? The only way ScrumAtScale really works, and by the way, the other frameworks too. I don't want to say that they work with only buy-in. That's not true. If you really want anything at scale to work, the leadership has to get behind it. They have to be willing to dig in and get their hands dirty. Now, how do you get them to do that? Well, I've been asked often, Tom, how did I become successful in this whole consulting job? And I like to say a bad attitude and a Brooklyn accent tends to go a long way. That's worked for me. It may not work for other people out there, unless they want.
Doesn't work well for me.
No, it doesn't work well for the guy from Utah. There's a lot of ways you can get this participation. One of them is, and I know this sounds weird, is by literally asking for it. Often, a lot of these initiatives that go on, they happen in one of the sponsors is not necessarily in the executive leadership. And so they run it by the executive leadership and say, are you okay with this? Yes, I'm okay. You can use some of the money, and that's it. They don't bother to say to them, in order for this to go supremely well, what we really need is for your assistance. A lot of leaders will say, yeah, but I've delegated those responsibilities to you. Okay, I understand that I'm empowered to make the decisions, but that doesn't mean that I don't want your feedback. A lot of times, the way I think about it is this way, Tom. There are very few times in your life that you ask somebody for help, like genuinely ask them for help, that they actually say no. And I think a lot of times the reason why we don't get leadership participation is because the people who are asking for it don't actually say, we need your help to do this right. We need your input. Instead, they just say, we need your sign off. We need your budget. Well, that's not, I mean, that's a kind of help, but that's not direct participatory help. And if you actually held an awareness session for them, that actually helped them understand what is your role in actually helping through the system. Like if you laid out, this is what we need your help for, and gave them a clear understanding of those responsibilities and accountabilities, then they're likely to help. See, when you go to them and you just make it this amorphous request, all they do is look at their calendar or their diary, as they call it in London, and say, I have no room for this. I have no space for this. I mean, all of us are experiencing this in the pandemic, in this post-pandemic world, more than before. Our calendars are booked, double booked, back to back to back, all day long, every day. How am I supposed to make room for this? You have to show them, this is what we need you for, and then you have to help them make room. And one of the ways you can do that is by having them join Scrum events or scaled events, which have very, very distinct and succinct start times and end times. We're not asking you to come to 5 new meetings, 2 hours each, where all you're going to be thinking about is, when am I getting out of here and doing my work? Instead, you make everything extremely purposeful with an agenda. You say, you're going to come to the review. We're going to literally show you in the first 15 minutes what value we delivered. And then we're going to ask you, did you like it? Did you not like it? And what's your suggestion for improvement? When you lay out to them what their responsibilities are or activities that they're going to be able to do, they're much more likely to participate.
So, Avi,
yeah,
you are a father. You are an agilist. So this question should be right up both of your alleys in that context. Isn't ScrumAtScale a kind of parental model because it relies on an E-level, EMS and executive action team to ultimately solve the big problems? Is it basically almost like a parent-child relationship?
I want to say yes, but the healthiest one you can imagine. There are, because it is. I mean, that's kind of the situation. Here's kind of the way I'm thinking about it. When you mentioned parenting, I remember when my daughter learned how to drive. Okay. They always say you can't teach your kids how to drive. I completely agree. First time I went out with her, I swear my hand was like this, just ready to grab the wheel at any moment. But that's not a good way to teach somebody how to drive. That's a good way to be one of these overburdening helicopter parents, just hoping everybody gets a participation trophy. That's not me. The best parent is the one, when I became the best parent, Tom, in that sense? I was with this is a true story. I'm with my daughter and I was with, the family and this and that. And we went out way out in New Jersey, and I was exhausted at the end of the day driving home. And I said, you know what, I'm really tired. And my daughter, she said, Dad, I'll drive. And I said, okay. And you know what I did, Tom? I went in the back seat and I laid down and I closed my eyes and I didn't watch. I know that sounds weird, right? Because we're talking about parenting.
No, but that's empowerment. That's autonomy. I mean, that's the interesting thing. The reason I asked this question is there's a fine line. It can be a parenting relationship or parental relationship, and that could be a problem that you then need to inspect, adapt, and improve on.
Your job is to make sure, do they know how to drive? Yes. Great. You sent them to driving school, whatever it is. Now, take your hands off the wheel. If you need as a leader to lay down in the back and close your eyes, go ahead and do it. Your job is to only pull them off the precipice of the cliff. Your job is not to sit there and say, there's a cliff, there's a cliff, there's a cliff, there's a cliff. That's annoying. Don't do that.
Yep. So one more question about the organization overall before we move into teams and value streams.
Sure.
And this is arguably one of the most common and most important questions that Scrum Inc. gets asked all the time. Yeah. How can we measure if the organization is ready for scaling?
Oh, ready. Oh, that's a great question. So just like, so I think again, I treat the organization as a product, right? So if the organization is a product, then there needs to be a backlog to create it, just like a backlog to create a product, backlog to create an organization, 100%. Okay. One of these backlog items has to be ready. So just like you would have a criteria for readiness, right? A criteria for readiness for a backlog item before you bring it into a sprint, you need a criteria for readiness for any effort in scaling that you're going to make. So if you say, for example, okay, we're going to add 2 new teams. Okay, well, what do we have to be ready to do that? Okay, are they going to be in the office? Do we have the physical space? Do we have laptops or computers purchased? Are we on the factory floor? Do we have stations? Do we have enough lockers? From the HR perspective, do we have really good job descriptions? From the finance perspective, do we have enough budget? You have to have a readiness criteria for any item you're doing from an organizational design perspective. Otherwise, just like any other item, it's possibly doomed to failure.
Okay. And I think there's always just the classic takeaway of eagerness does not equal readiness, and being able to define those two is incredibly important. Yeah. So let's move on to teams, because obviously when you're dealing with scaling and you're building your organization, the way you build your products, you will end up with multiple teams in many instances. Yeah. That can lead to dependencies, which is always tricky and is like a governor on an agile engine. It will slow things down if it's not handled correctly. Yeah. So how do you best solve for dependencies in a scaled environment? Okay, so this is a great question. We get it all the time. There is, of course, a couple parts to the answer. First part to the answer is just like the value stream, you need a dependency map. One of the weirdest things I've ever done is I've gone to organizations and they say, oh, we have so many dependencies, blah, blah, blah. And I say, okay, great. Where's the map? And they're like, what do you mean the map? You need to map physically. Tom, in the old days, we used to do this. We would go to a board, put all these Post-it notes on it, and we used to use physical red string and attach dependencies. You can do it digitally. There's a lot of products out there. I know of Linkit, for example. You use it and you can actually draw the graphic dependency. You can do this if you use Miro or Mural, any of these whiteboarding tools. And you need to get a lay of the land when it comes to dependencies about where they exist from a team perspective, as well as even sometimes even an individual perspective. And also, of course, a component perspective. I'm speaking now about the components of your actual products or services. So you need to have a map of those dependencies. Okay, once you get the map, now you can start to talk about dependency management. I like to think of dependency management from 2 perspectives, the product owner perspective and the Scrum Master perspective. The product owner's job is dependency prevention from a backlog perspective. By looking at a dependency map, by looking at the backlog and having that zoomed out view again, they need to be able to say to the other product owners, okay, here's how we're going to slot the work in the sprints so that the dependencies are not necessarily eliminated, but rather accounted for. Is it great to eliminate dependencies and to move work to a single team so that you don't have them? 100%. But you can't always cut the strings. So when you can't cut the strings and move the work, then you have to talk about sprint slotting in an effective way. And this has to be done by a product owner team. Remember, we're talking about scale now, right? Mm-hmm. So this has to be done with the product owner team and the chief product owner, who is essentially the tiebreaker in these decisions. Now that's dependency prevention, backlog holistic. The Scrum Master side of things is dependency mitigation. This is where, hey, we didn't know about this dependency, or team 1 didn't deliver as fast as they thought, and now team 2 is stuck. This is where the Scrum Master and the Scrum Master cycle kicks in and starts to take over to handle things in real time. More like a rapid reaction force. Yeah, 100%. That's what all these things have to be. You know, you have to have it this way where you have to have a 2-pronged attack. One that's holistic and coming at it from ahead of time as much as possible, and one that's more reactionary in the real time, in the thick of it. Sure. So let's talk about another common question, and it's common because it needs to be solved, and it's very important, which is, what do you do with teams that provide shared services? How would you structure that? Because, and for everybody, just to make sure we're on the same page, obviously with shared services, critical skills or functions, but they may not need to be on every team, so they can be on their own standalone team. How would you fit those in there? How do you think that works best in a scaled organization?
Should I show the slide, Tom, you think, or should we just talk it out?
Just talk it out.
So the best way to do that, and we handle this all the time, this is everywhere. I have yet to go into an organization that said, oh no, Avi, no, we have too many people here. That's literally never happened. Put me where you need me. That's never happened, ever. Everywhere we go, they always say, we don't have enough of these people. We don't have enough of those people. They all tend to operate as leanly as possible. So what we have to do is we have to identify what are these scarce skill sets. In those companies, they use the term scarce resources. In Scrum, we don't call people resources. People are people, So how do you handle the scarce resource situation? First of all, what you need to do is form them into their own kind of group, but not sit them together. That's the big mistake. One of the big mistakes is they say, oh, well, it's going to be a shared services unit, like the architects or something. And then they put all 5 architects together, and all these people do is talk architecture all day. It can work, but it's suboptimal. What we have found that works better is to put the architects out into the value streams on like what you would call a home team. This way, they learn to work on a cross-functional team, working from a backlog, and the whole Scrum and ScrumAtScale situation. Then, whoever's the head of the department acts as the product owner for the unit, right? But it's a virtual team. So they have a clear and transparent backlog of all, we're talking about architecture, right? All the architecture stories, right? That person helps to divvy out the work. But additionally, if the work, for example, is not on that architect's home team, they say, hey, listen, you sit on team 2, but team number 7 needs help with architecture. Now, in the old days, Tom, they used to get up there, take their laptop, get up and literally walk over and sit down with team number 7 and become a team number 7 member for the duration of the work. Now, today you could do it virtually. There's no difference, right? And now, again, that product owner of the architects, the chief architect or whatever he wants to call himself or herself at the time, they act as a dispatch agent, sending out the backlog and helping people move around to coordinate it. So just like a conductor in an orchestra, you're gonna play now, then you're gonna play, then you're gonna play, and this is how long you're gonna play for. And then when they're done, they get back up. The old days, now instead they just log on to the old team meetings, or maybe they go help out a new team somewhere else that has an architecture problem. And so in this way, everybody gets to benefit from a shared services model, but the shared services people aren't sitting in a silo, which essentially insulates them from the rest of the work. And then they start to lose perspective on how the architecture feeds into everything else that's going on. If you've ever built a house, it's really interesting when the architect, they never meet the construction crew. And then the construction crew gets these plans and they're like, well, we can't build it this way. You can't put the electrical wire in the middle of the water system. It's not up to code. You want to put the architects, the electrician,
break down the silos to make sure everything is laying together. Absolutely understand. Together. So we've only got a few more minutes here, Avi, and I'm going to go to some value stream questions.
Sure.
And the first one, I'm going to do a slight twist on the actual question that we received, which is the number of teams for each value stream. The original question was, do you recommend one, team per stream? But I'm going to twist this question a little bit because because you and I speak to each other on a regular basis. And as you said, there are some streams that require many teams for a variety of reasons. Is there a way to best define the number of teams a particular value stream should have?
No, I don't think so, to be honest with you. I really don't. Because it's very much to the product, right? If you're talking about building a rocket, you may have a lot of teams. If you're talking about making a new flavor of seltzer, you don't need so many. But even something like making a new flavor of seltzer, one of my largest clients is Anheuser-Busch. They make beer, they make hard seltzer. We still have a lot of teams involved. We have beverage development, we have brewing, we have marketing, we have packaging, we have a huge amount of teams together. But in the value stream, it's all about how many teams do you need to get it out the door. And now when you say how many, Tom, let's always go back to a principle of lean. What's the least number of teams you need to get it out the door? To me, that's the right number of teams.
So let's go to the final question here, which is about stable teams. Now, stable teams are obviously a core component of Scrum, higher performing, but well, not of Scrum, but we always approach stable teams.
Right.
The question is, if we're bringing people to new value streams, does this mean pulling people out of stable teams? Or how would you best go about this? How do you prevent the disruption to stable teams?
This is a great question. And let me be clear here. I don't want to give the traditional consulting answer, it depends, but it depends. My personal belief is actually everything you do in business is a cost benefit analysis. So you have to ask yourself, if you don't take somebody from an existing team and you spin up all new teams, what is the cost of the new teams and what is the cost of delay that you're going to suffer in terms of getting those teams up to speed and getting value produced and out the door? As opposed to, what if you had 6 teams in a value stream and you were able to take, because now you want to duplicate the value stream, and you're able to take just one person out of each of those 6 teams and say, great, come over here. Now you backfill those 6 positions over here. So you're still hiring 6 new people, but those teams are really efficient as they are. Only one person has to get up to speed. Over here now, those new value streams, if they take the guidance of the person that's brought over, those whole new teams, that may be, you got 6 teams, you're talking 30 some odd people. You can get them up to speed really, really fast by replicating the system. Now, stable teams is an awesome pattern in Scrum. It's not in the Scrum guide. We know that it enhances everything. But again, you have to do the cost benefit analysis. If it makes more sense to destabilize the team to reproduce new teams, and by the way, that's what we used to do back in the day all the time, was use existing high functioning teams to be the seeds of the next set of teams. It works great. It works great.
So the last thing I want to say too, which is a question that we've seen quite a bit on, is Valuestream Mapping, Avi. We've seen a number of questions about this. You obviously gave us a broad level look at it. A number of people have asked, are we, Scrum Inc., doing another Valuestream Mapping course? Because of course, one just ended yesterday.
Yes, 100%. We've got them coming up. We've got the new class coming out, which is the Agile Valuestream Manager, because this is actually a role. And the idea behind that is it's not going to be a 1-day, it'll be a 2-day class. We'll announce it soon. There's your preview announcement right here. It's going to be a brand new credential. It's a real live job in industry. You'll be able to get your credential from us, and it's going to merge the whole notion of Agile and value stream management together in a way that nobody else in the market has it right now.
Excellent. And everybody can obviously go to scruminc.com to find that course. I'm going to give another sneak peek. Our next webinar is actually going to be focused on a lot of the principles that Avi is talking about, which is it will be honestly our biggest, most in-depth case study that Scrum Inc. has ever put out. What was the project that we did for 2 years with John Deere that deals with scaling on a massive level. And I can just tell you from working on it, the results are amazing. So sneak peek, you're going to get a note about that in the near future. Please join us there. With that, I do think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We also have coming up the Registered Agile Leader at Scale. That's coming up towards the end of June. And there'll be a link that you can click in the PDF that's going to be distributed. Excellent.
Well, as you can see, we're always trying to make sure that you can find little sneak peeks about our latest and most important offerings. Thanks everybody for joining us. This has been, as always, a wonderful webinar. Avi, thank you very much. And we'd like to thank our authorized Agile education providers for sponsoring this. And again, please keep an eye out for the email. The next webinar is going to be about our case study, ScrumAtScale, product management, portfolio management, just about every aspect of their business. All done with Scrum, ScrumAtScale, value streams, everything Avi's talking about. We look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.